No other country in the world is prepared to understand the Russian threat as much as the Ukrainian military. The tactics that Russia has been developing with their FPVs, with their drones, with their fiber optics are well beyond what any other army on earth is equipped with. The US tweeted out, I think it was the US Army Twitter account, tweeted about 6 weeks ago saying, "We just did an experiment and dropped a drone from a grenade for the first time ever." This is something that Ukrainians have been doing for years. And people were laughing at it here because that's how behind the US is in even understanding the new tactics of drone warfare. Estonia are pretty good. A lot of the drone units that I spent time with in Estonia had learnt directly from what Ukrainians are doing on the front lines. They showed me frontline FPVs and sort of drones that I've seen in the Donbass in Estonia, but it's still nowhere near enough to combat the Russian threat. We spend across Europe, on average, less than 1% of our GDP on defense. Russia is spending nearly 50% of their economy on defense. And when you put those two things together, one side isn't equipped enough yet at all. Ukraine are basically the only country on earth that are equipped to deal with the Russian army. And that's how they've held it off, I think, for nearly 4 years. And if the Russians, I remember reading stats recently that said if the British army came into Ukraine and started directly fighting on the front lines in the same way that Ukrainians would, we would run out of artillery in 3 days. That's how much stuff we have. That's how prepared we are. It's well behind. And that's why it's good to support Ukraine, I think, as well, because this country has learned cutting-edge information about frontline warfare and the way that it's changing through AI, through drone systems, that is vital for any country on earth that cares about defense. And I don't think any other country is prepared as Ukraine. And it's super, super worrying. It takes a lot to combat the Russian army. I've seen it close up. I always say that Russia is failing in a lot of ways. Their economy is collapsing, but they're pretty well equipped on the front line. And they're throwing everything they can, not just at Ukraine, but Europe. And it's going to take a lot for everyone else to wake up, you know?
Yeah, but do they pretty well equipped thanks to who? Thanks to other dictators they're friends with, like China, Iran, North Korea?
There's an axis that's been formed, and it's Iran, and it's China, and it's Russia, and it's North Korea. It used to be Syria, but since Assad fled to Moscow, they no longer have that as an ally. And that is basically the powerhouse of the Russian army right now. Iran is supplying so much of the technology. That's why the drones are called Shaheeds. North Korea are supplying the troops. China are helping to circumvent the sanctions and provide the tech. And it looks like other countries as well will start getting involved too. And the most annoying thing about that is we have all, in the West, allowed an alliance to exist without any question. The idea that British troops should enter Ukraine is so heavily debated. How could we possibly get involved? But Russia can openly call up North Korea and say, hey, can we get 30,000 troops? Can we get 50,000 troops? And no one says a thing. And that's the main difference. It's almost like in World War II, you had the Allies and the Axis powers, but only one side would have an actual cohesive group, and the other side was still split. And that's kind of what's happening right now. Europe is not united in the same way that this new axis with Russia is united. Because Russia alone couldn't continue this war without help from evil dictatorships all around the planet. And that's what's funding this war, and that's what's keeping it going. And until that stops, and until all that runs out, or until Europe gets itself together, it's just going to continue.
Peace guarantees. The question they're discussing now, it's on the surface, it's everywhere, every headline. And especially after Oval Office meeting in the White House with American President Zelensky and European leaders, we have a strong discussion after this week. And they are talking seriously, from my perspective, about the peacekeeping missions in Ukraine, at least at the west of Ukraine. Where do you think we're going with it?
I think it's very unlikely that there'll be any kind of peacekeeping efforts. Every single time there's been a mention of the word peace to do with NATO or Ukraine ends up with just delays and with nothing. And even if Britain or even if NATO put troops on the ground in Ukraine to guarantee peace, all that Russia would do would be pollute our airwaves in Britain and Ireland and the rest of the world, to say, get troops off the ground, bring our troops home, get our troops out of Ukraine. And by the time the next election kicks in, they'd probably withdraw, because Russia, I think what the main failure is Western countries and liberal democracies don't understand the Soviet mindset, the Soviet thinking, which is 100 years ahead. They're willing to get through millions of Russians until they take this country, until they take the rest of Europe. And we're thinking in a tiny short-term strategy that we can just temporarily hold peace just to see how it goes. And I think that's the sort of the main difference between what's going on here. And so, yeah, putting British troops on the ground, we have a government that changes every 4 years. Probably the next government promises, because of Russian propaganda, would say that we'll take our troops home and we'll just let everything go. But every single time that the West has had any kind of peace promises with Russia, it's ended in chaos. In 2009, Hillary Clinton stood with Sergei Lavrov and she had a big red button and she said, we're going to hit this button and we're going to reset our relationship with Russia. We're going to forget about the bad days of the Cold War. We're going to forget about all of that horrible stuff and we're going to renew our relationship with peace. Well, look what happened next. We had the invasion of Crimea. We had the Donetsk People's Republic set up and the disruption that happened there. And we had Russia wage a hybrid war all across the rest of Europe. And so every single time there's any mention of peacekeeping or guarantees in this country, Ukraine has been betrayed by the West every time. Even in 1994, this country had the third largest nuclear arsenal on the planet, and they gave it up. And I visited the museum and I saw those silos where those nuclear weapons are now gathering dust. And Ukraine promised to give it up for peace, for these sanctions. And look what happened now.
Yeah, so if Budapest memorandum doesn't work, and if Minsk agreement, it didn't go anywhere, didn't lead anywhere, what security guarantees will be the best for Ukraine? No, the realistic. No, the best is the one topic, but realistic. Caolan, what are realistic for now?
The only security guarantees right now is the West realizing that the only way that Ukraine can survive is if Russia is destroyed economically. Russia will not stop doing what it's doing until it can't afford to do it anymore. And the West has the power to do that. The West can do more sanctions, and the West can also sanction India, which trades all of its oil. If Russia can't afford to pay soldiers to kill Ukrainians, this would stop in days. That's the only way to stop Russia. Anything else is genuinely just a delay tactic to allow Russia to rearm. And I think that's possible. I'm extremely hopeful for Ukraine. I think this country will survive, and it has for so long, and it will be a success story. But only when Russia is economically destroyed. There is nothing that will stop the imperialist, colonialist ambitions of the Soviet mindset.
They don't give a damn about people. Why? The soldiers, I mean. And the people of Russia as well.
I mean, a lot of people from the UK and from the West say that once Putin's gone, all this will stop. And I don't think that's true. Because from the lower to the upper class of Russian society, there's a fundamental indifference to human life. And it's actually quite a racist and fascist mindset. And it's that if you're not from the motherland of Russia, your life doesn't matter. You're a state to be colonized. You're a person to be ridiculed and subjugated. And that exists throughout every single corner of the Soviet mindset. And the only way that's dealt with is if it's isolated. These people will always exist, Russia will always exist, but it should be isolated from the rest of the world. Unable to arm itself, unable to afford a war, and unable to travel, unable to do holidays in Europe, unable to do anything. That's the only way that that mindset is done, is contained.